I thank you for listening and hope that you enjoy the Oblivion Cycle short story, Reign of Terror. It was a glorious Saturday, that most holy of all days. Trevor was done with his homework, and his mother had told him he could go for a hike in the woods to his favorite place all by himself today. She usually made him take his annoying younger brother Brent, and he didn't like having to babysit him, as he was a major pain. But he was still his brother, and he loved him regardless. Trevor knew that his hometown of Holliston was not really that big of a place, but it seemed plenty big to him. It took him a whole 20 minutes to walk from his house on the edge of town to the shopping center on the other side. He usually liked to get away from the relative bustle of the city and out of the town when he had the chance though. Trevor was wearing his best hiking boots and a sturdy pair of denim shorts as he made his way through the woods towards Greytop Mountain. It wasn't really a mountain, but it was the largest hill overlooking the shallow valley Hollistown sat in. The view from the top of the mound was incredible. You could see for ages in all directions. It was as if the entirety of Freshholm fell away to the horizons, and he was standing on the top of the world. He loved the feeling. Stopping by a small brook, Trevor took the chance to refill his water bottle from the fresh spring water runoff that ran alongside the trail. His bottle would automatically test the water for contaminants and then filter them out. But the taste of the fresh groundwater was still a luxury that he savored, quite different from the triple-filtered and demineralized fluid that dispensed from the taps in his home. He sat on a nearby log and sipped the cool water for a few minutes as he looked at his surroundings with eyes wide, the pure light of true delight making his youthful features shine. Freshholm was one of those rare planets whose biosphere was naturally inhabitable to the vast majority of the known Union races. Humans, like himself, enjoyed wide open spaces and blue oxygenated skies with mild temperatures. The fuzzy Yaun, he had been told, liked more enclosed spaces with huge trees and dense forests. The Vinterfell liked tropical jungles and high humidity, the burrowing aliens well known for their affinity for tight spaces, and the grumpy Atraxes liked frigid, frozen ice balls, like their homeworld of Hothorel. He remembered learning about all the races of the Union in school, his teacher paying special attention to the most recently discovered species, like the enigmatic Jaso and the Yaun themselves. Trevor took another moment to rest before standing and getting back to hiking. He had grabbed a long stick with a pleasantly sword-like shape he had found along the edge of the trail, and he swung it idly as he walked, the tip whistling through the air as he smacked a few of the nearby shrubs and low foliage. Trevor looked to the small shrubs and bushes that surrounded him on the dusty trail. There were trees here, but they were small, scraggly things only a few meters in height. His mother had told him that their homeworld, a place called Dirt or something like that, Dirt had a higher gravity than Freshholm, but Trevor liked it here just fine. Why would anyone want to weigh more when they didn't have to? He thought to himself with a wry chuckle. It just didn't make any sense why anyone would still live on such a world at all. Trevor stood as he finished sipping his water and refilled the bottle from the stream again before clipping it to his small hiking backpack. He had made sure, Mother had made sure, that he packed a nice healthy lunch to eat once she reached Greytop Peak. Trevor once more started up the narrow trail that wound its way towards the highest part of the mountain. He looked out for roots and other things that could trip him. While his eyes were down, he spotted an interesting-looking rock. Picking it up, he saw that it was tan with a funny blue stripe going through the middle of it, and he smiled. His father liked to collect odd rocks and minerals, and would surely appreciate this find. Trevor stuck it in his pocket to give to his father when he returned later that evening. As he walked, he whistled a tuneless song from the depths of his subconscious. The sound of the wind as it whispered through the bushes was his only company. The native wildlife on Freshholm was mostly limited to aquatic life and small insects, most of which were completely harmless to him, though he was always on the lookout for pinch flies. They were small, 5-segmented insects with large pinchers where one might expect to instead see a mouth. While they were not venomous like bees from Dirt, they did deliver painful pinches to anything that strayed into their territory. Trevor remembered the first time he and Brent had found some of the nasty critters when they were on vacation at the coast a few years ago. They had stumbled upon a small buried hive of them as they were walking along the beach, and the bugs, angry at being disturbed, had swarmed them and covered them in painful pinches. Brent and him had run crying back to their parents, who had calmed them down and explained their biology to them. Trevor had been interested immediately. but Brent had not seemed to care. Brent was 14, only 2 years younger than Trevor himself, and he was always complaining, always whinging on about boredom and talking about hologames. Trevor never understood his younger brother's lack of interest in the natural world. He had played some of his brother's hologames and found them entertaining, but at the end of the day, he would always eventually end up wandering outside to interact with the tangible world. Trevor knelt down by the edge of the trail as he spotted a ripe brickleberry bush. He knew the bright orange berries were inedible to him, but they were the favorite treat of his pet groint. He had found the large insect under the garbage can behind their home one afternoon and kept him. They were large, about 10 centimeters long, and kind of cute in a buggy sort of way, their large eyes and funny little legs making them seem delightfully stubby. He had tried to find what they ate and had discovered that they liked the native equivalent of fruits and berries. Trevor had named his pet groint Jerry and had given him a large glass aquarium to live in. The groint were unique in the fact that they could live to be 8 standard years old and seemed to be mildly intelligent. It was assumed that they were the planet's equivalent of rodents, though mammals had seemingly not yet evolved on the world naturally. Trevor put the small handful of foraged berries in a plastic bag that he then put in his pack alongside a small brown bag his mother had handed him as he left. Jerry would have a feast when he got back home. Trevor smiled. The way Jerry's little feeler antenna would perk up when he saw him made him sure that the little bugs were much smarter than most people gave them credit for. Trevor kept walking up the path. It was a bright sunny day. The pale yellow sun was high in the deep blue sky. There were a few wispy white clouds skirting lazily along the distant horizon, and he could just make out the glint of the nearby gas giant Helios 2 in the sky. It was a lot further away than it looked, but it was big enough and reflected enough of their star's light that it was visible even at midday when the sky was clear. At night, the large planet became even more spectacular, like a bright orange button that slowly swung through the starry night sky. A new sound reached Trevor's ears as he neared the top of the mountain, a series of distant thunder-like cracks, or like something big hitting the ground very far away. He scrunched his eyebrows at the strange noise and started to walk a little faster. It was probably a trick of the wind, but he wanted to get to the top of the mountain to look at his surroundings unobstructed. If there was a storm incoming, he would have to cut his hike short and rush home. He didn't want his mother to worry. Scrambling up the last steep bit of trail, Trevor turned to look the way he had come from. He saw the entire valley laid out below him, arranged in a small patchwork of urbanized scrubland. The city looked so much smaller from up on top of the world. He frowned again, as something about the scene didn't seem quite right. There was something wrong, but he couldn't place it at first. Again, those distant cracks sounded, and Trevor jerked in surprise as he finally noticed what was off about the scene. The sun was almost directly overhead, and should have been lighting up the valley brightly, but there was an ominous, gloomy shadow hanging over the city, as if the sun feared to shine upon it. Trevor looked up and saw no clouds. He looked up higher and gasped in shock. Hanging high in the sky, almost invisible through the atmospheric haze, was a titanic starship, the likes of which he had never seen in person. The ship was huge and dark, bristling with all manner of strange devices that looked like weapons to him. He knew a warship when he saw one. Brent's hologames were often full of them, great battleships and dreadnoughts that held weapons of terrifying potency. Trevor was mesmerized by the sight at first. This massive object seemingly hung in the sky as if by magic. He knew it was probably still in space, and using its engines to stay aloft, but it was hard to tell from so far away. He jumped again as he heard those strange crackling thumps again, each boom hitting him like a small fist of solid air now that he was in the open. It was only now that he realized something was falling from the massive ship into the atmosphere. Tiny little dots fell from the battleship, heating up as they passed through the air at incredible speeds before slamming down on the ground all around the edges of his hometown. Trevor didn't know what they were, but didn't like what was happening nevertheless. He knew enough of the Union to understand that there was conflict happening all around, but certainly it would never have come to a small place like his home, would it? Trevor pulled out his small cellular communicator to call his mother and ask what was happening when a near-blinding flash lit the valley in a harsh light. Trevor looked up and whimpered in fear as he witnessed a massive explosion tear through the center of Hollistown like a hurricane of fire. He saw the local supermarket get hit by another object, this one sleeker and somehow deadlier looking than the others, before the entire structure detonated in a tremendous explosion moments later as the object exploded. The shattered remains of the building left burning trails through the air as they sailed hundreds of meters from the blast to cause more damage and destruction all around. Trevor felt his knees getting weak as he watched the destruction play out before his shocked eyes. Explosion after explosion tearing great burning gouges out of the place he had called home for the entirety of his young life. He saw his school hit directly as it was flattened completely. The stadium where he had been playing sports with his friends only 2 days before was smashed to splinters by a wave of force that traveled the kilometers to him in seconds and hit him like a hammer blow to the gut, causing his eyes to tear up as he was knocked back a step. The tears kept coming, streaming from his widening eyes as his knees gave way and he fell to the ground, paralyzed by fear and horror. He couldn't look away from it though. By the grace of luck, he couldn't look away. A sob tore through him as he saw his dad's workplace smashed flat and a tremendous fireball and spray of burning debris. He shook his head as another explosion tore a 20-meter crater into the neighborhood his house was in, the tiny silhouettes of entire cars and trees being tossed away like grains of sand in the wind. Houses flattened by the tidal wave of force that seemed to brush all before it aside as easily as he might knock over a house made of paper. Trevor saw more destruction and knew in his heart that this was wrong. Who could do something like this? Something so absolutely heinous. He began to scream in rage and deep emotional pain as the shelling continued. He threw his hands in the air and cursed the small ship in the sky to every bad place he could think of, and a few that he made up on the spot. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey him as he was rocked back by more of those hammer blows of force. The heat from the explosions was so great that even at this distance, the air quickly grew hot and dry, causing him to cough as the smell of fire and death began to blow on the acrid wind. Trevor screwed his eyes shut, but still saw the flashes through the self-imposed darkness, and knew that there were screams carried on the wind that he couldn't hear. He knew at the moment that his family was dead, his friends, his teachers, everyone he had ever known. Hell, Jerry was gone too, and he shuddered at that. Jerry had been his responsibility. If he hadn't taken him in, he probably would be alive and happy out in the wild somewhere far from the carnage that still played out beyond the darkness of his closed eyes. For whatever reason, the realization that he was probably directly responsible for the small bug's death hit him harder than the apocalypse that was playing out before him. He fell to his side and curled up into a tight ball. But as tight as he got, he couldn't block out the ground-shaking explosions or the eye-searing pulses of light that still burst over the horizon. Lights swam behind his eyes as the spots the flashes had burned into his eyes swam through his mind. Trevor didn't know how much longer the horror went on for, or even what time it had started. He just stayed curled up like that, trying to ignore the fact that the entire world was dying, and he couldn't do anything about it. The sounds and fear finally overtook his fragile young mind. Darkness engulfed him as he lost consciousness. Trevor awoke in a cold sweat. He didn't remember falling asleep, but he had. He shivered as the fact it was dark caught up to his overwhelmed senses. He prayed that it had been a nightmare, but was hit with a fresh wave of horror as he sat up and saw the ominous glow in the sky to his east. He stood shakily to his feet and sobbed openly as he saw the cratered, burned remains of Hollistown in the distance. The entire area was covered in smoldering fires and deep shattered craters in the planet's crust. Nothing remained, not a single building, not even so much as a power pole. It was all gone. He shuddered as he thought he heard a faint crack nearby in the dark that surrounded him. He relaxed as he remembered there wasn't anything out there that could really hurt him. Still, it was better to be safe than to be sorry. Trevor pulled out his small pocket knife that his dad had given him on his birthday last year. The blade was only a few centimeters long and dulled by constant use, but he brandished it as a pirate would a saber. He sniffled as the memory brought fresh tears to his eyes. He jerked his head up as he heard another small noise. There was definitely something in the darkness. He knew it now. Hey, stay back! I have a knife! He shouted into the gloom as confidently as he could manage. The gloom didn't answer back, and he stood shakily with his arm raised threateningly for a few more moments before he relaxed again. It must have been his imagination. Luck herself knew it had been a traumatic enough a day. Trevor was surprised he was still conscious and functioning. He knew enough of medical stuff to know he was probably in some sort of shock and needed to get warm before his body began to shut down. Part of him didn't really see the point anymore. There was nothing he could do, nowhere to go, no further point in trying to make it to the next day. He sat down on the ground next to his pack and opened it to grab out his jacket and noticed a small brown paper sack again. As he saw his small packed lunch, he smiled grimly. Good old Mom, always looking out for him. Trevor began to cry openly now. Tiny tears ran down his face as he sobbed quietly and clenched his jacket to his chest. He heard another small noise but ignored it this time. If there was something in the dark that wanted him dead, he was okay with that now. He had nothing to live for anyways. Suddenly a voice spoke to him from the darkness, making him yell in surprise as he jumped to his feet once more, the jacket still held firmly in his grip as he looked for a direction to bolt. The voice changed in pitch suddenly. Hey, don't be afraid, kid. Whoa, hey, calm down there, buddy. I'm not here to hurt you. Trevor groaned as his legs cramped up, and he sprawled to the ground only a few meters from where he had been sitting. His attempt to run away was cut brutally short by his own rebellious muscles. Looking up, he saw a dark-suited figure step out of the darkness, and his heart froze in his chest. The figure walked slowly, with its large hands up, before taking off some sort of headgear and placing it on the ground. Trevor's eyes widened as he saw the scaly head of a Sloveth female looking back at him, her dark black eyes glinting in the pale starlight. Trevor looked at her warily as she spoke again. Hey kid, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here looking for survivors. This is a rescue mission. Can you stand? Trevor nodded and stood slowly to his feet, hunched and ready to bolt. The woman smiled at him and he had to remind himself that she was trying to be friendly, though a rows of dagger-like teeth made her smile feel a little less inviting. Who are you? He asked the woman quietly as he inched towards his bag. She made no move to get closer or impede his progress as she tapped her chest and responded. Union Search and Rescue. We got an alert of a natural disaster and shipped out to your system immediately. Luckily, we were only a few hours away. When we got here, however, we found what looked like the after effects of a war zone, not a natural disaster. We searched near the ruins, but found nobody. We were about to give up hope of finding anyone when one of our drones picked up your heat signature on top of this hill. They sent us to investigate, and here you are, she explained simply as he reached into his bag and pulled out the small sack lunch. If he was going to be here a while, he might as well eat, so he pulled out the sandwich and took a big bite before asking. You said here we are. Who is we? She smiled at him and stood tall. USAR Team Gamma 30. We are here to help. Come on out, guys. What is your name, kid? Mine is Drolsh. She gave him another of those unsettling, too wide smiles. Drolsh? He said, rolling the strange new name around on his tongue. She smiled and nodded. He smiled back at her shyly. Trevor Dean. He stuck out his hand and she looked at it curiously before gripping it and shaking it with one of her large webbed hands. She was wearing gloves, but he could still feel the claws that tipped each long alien finger. She smiled again at the motion. A handshake. That means we are friends, right? Trevor was a little confused, but answered. Yeah, definitely. She bobbed up and down excitedly, making her tall head frill sway. Don't worry, Trevor. You are going to be okay. We are going to take care of you. Trevor felt tears threatening to well up in his eyes again, but he shoved them down. There was no way he was going to cry like a baby in front of a girl. What would she think of him if he did that? He had to admit she was pretty in an alien sort of way, and she seemed genuinely concerned for his well-being. Trying to be casual, he watched as several more figures wearing brown uniforms stepped out of the shadows and turned on their headlights. So, do you know what happened here? He directed the question at her in particular, but he said it loud enough for the surrounding USAR team to hear. She shook her head slowly. No, I was hoping you could tell us, if it's not too painful. Trevor stood straight and squared his shoulders. He put the sandwich down on his pack as he began to recount the tale starting from where he had left his house that morning. His eyes teared up a bit as he talked about Jerry, and Drolsh stepped a bit closer to him as he shivered. He reached the peak and recounted what he had witnessed. Several of the team members standing around him gasped as he described the ruthless attack. The lack of mercy displayed by the orbital bombardment against a civilian population made one of the rescue team weep openly, the small feathered form of the Swaneth seemingly deeply distressed by his recounting of events. Trevor stayed stoic for as long as he could. Determined to be strong like his father, even as tears leaked from the corners of his eyes at the memory. His shoulders quivered from the effort of holding his feelings in, and Drolsh stepped to his side with a concerned look. Trevor, are you alright? You are shivering, she asked him in a concerned voice. her slight gurgling accent giving her voice a strange wavering tone. "I'm fine," he croaked out through gritted teeth, but he wasn't. The shock of what had happened finally washed over him as he started to shiver violently once more. Drolsh gurgled in surprise and jumped forwards to catch him as his knees gave out and he started to fall. She caught him before he hit the ground. Her hands were cold as she cradled him in her arms. Trevor felt the world spinning around him as he looked into her eyes and he whispered through chattering teeth, "Please don't leave me," before darkness swarmed his vision and his world descended into welcome oblivion as he finally allowed himself to sleep. This story may have been a little on the darker side. Many of the stories in the Oblivion cycle are, but not everything that stems from such conflict is horror. As one doorway is forever closed, another opens to new possibilities once thought impossible. Thank you for listening to this fictional tale set in the Oblivion cycle universe, and a very special thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters that make doing what I do easier. It is the goal of the setting and its many stories of grim, dark, cosmic horror and science fiction to entertain and inspire. So to all those still listening, I thank you for your time, and welcome to keep listening as long as you are able. I am Lord Frostdraken the Deranged.